Welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference, which we are holding on site for the first time since the pandemic began. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Our co-hosts are John Christensen of UCLA, who's been instrumental in shepherding the project from the very beginning. My colleagues from EMS, Julian Doe and Pilar Marrero. Gabrielle Lerner, Executive Editor, now Editor Emeritus of La Opinion, and Regina Brown-Wilson, Executive Director of the California Black Media. A special thanks to Resources Legacy Fund and Alfredo Gonzalez for their support. We're hosting today's briefing at Clock Shop, The Legion, a beautiful space in Los Angeles on the banks of the Los Angeles River. Because the river, all 51 miles of it, is our star attraction. Being here gives some reporters a chance to see and photograph the river and hear directly from stakeholders who are working to turn a decades-long dream of revitalizing the river into reality. We are also releasing the first multilingual poll of what residents of Los Angeles County think about the river, conducted by noted pollster Fernando Guerra and his colleague Brian Gilbert at LMU's Center for the Study of Los Angeles. We have not commissioned a multilingual poll for our ethnic media partners since 2016. And today, I would like to dedicate the poll to the memory of Sergio Bendixson, a pioneer in multilingual polling who did so much to project diverse voices into the public forum. We open the briefing with words from Rudy Ortega, Jr., tribal president of the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, in recognition of the original people who lived and continue to live along the river's banks. Fernando Guerra will then share the results of the poll, and we will then hear from a panel of stakeholders moderated by John Christensen. And our opening speaker, Assembly Speaker Antonio Rendon, has asked to speak at 11:20, so we will hold questions probably until the end of our panel, although normally we would have questions after each speaker. For our colleagues on Zoom, please enter questions on the chat box, and we will ask our speakers to answer them either on the chat or via email after the conference. We will take questions as time permits from reporters on site. A reminder, especially for our colleagues on Zoom, the briefing today runs 90 minutes. For those who are here, we'll close with a light lunch, one-on-one interviews with speakers, and there are some wonderful language-fluent speakers today, and a tour, a mini tour of the river. We will send a video of today's briefing and the poll slides to everyone via email this afternoon. And now, to our speakers, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Rudy Ortega, who is going to formally welcome us again. Rudy.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning with everybody, especially talking about the Los Angeles River and the usage and what it should be and what it is exactly. And for us as a tribal people, you know, we've always used it as a resource for us, and it was always alive for us, it's kin to us. So I just want to acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva people, my tribe, the Fernandino Tataviam people, who have descendants that are here, including myself, that descend from multiple villages. Within my tribe, I have people who come from the village of Coenga, Tahanga, and Yamna. My lineage comes from the village of Situkanga, which right adjacent runs across LA River. All of my other lineages go all the way up to Santa Cruz Valley, of Tochunanga, Chaiwananga, present days of Badgie Mountain and then Newhall area. So with that, I'd like to welcome and begin these conversations with the opening of a song. So this song that I'm going to sing, the words is Paco, much like the word Pacoima, which is one of our words, means the entrance. Paco means enter. Khmer means come. So I'm going to sing this song, and we sing this song when we travel from village to village, and we welcome the folks that are traveling into our village. So I'd like to sing this song as we open up and welcome everyone. Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, mena que ma'a, mena que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, mena que ma'a, mena que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, mena que ma'a, mena que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, mena que ma'a, mena que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, Paco que ma'a, mena que ma'a, mena que ma'a. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to introduce Fernando O'Gara, who will present the polling data. And remember, we did not give you the actual slides. We will at the end of the conference. I learned years ago, if you give the study to the audience, you look at the study and you don't listen to the pollster. So you'll get it after.
Thank you, Sandy, and more importantly, thank you for your leadership for this effort and everything that you've been doing to protect the river and protect Los Angeles. I'm going to move over here, and so are the slides on the...
They will be.
They will be, okay. Let me just say, number one, this is a great day. This is the kind of day you should be at the river, the beach, or a park. And what we want to do is make this river even more accessible to more Angelenos, especially when we start thinking and reimagining what a post-pandemic city is going to look like. The river should be up front because we need to be outside. We need to have activities that are part of this new post-pandemic urban space. And I think what the data that we are going to present to you indicate that Angelenos imagine a river and think of a river and are very supportive of this effort. For me, the river has always been on my consciousness. When I was 4 and 5, I actually lived on Homer Street, and the front door when I opened it was the river. And so since a child, I imagined what this river could be, always and constantly disappointed about what it was, and trying to take it back to its resource in terms of Mr. Ortega and how he framed his first comments about this was a resource for the indigenous. It is a resource of sorts, but a limited one today, and we must make it a resource for the future of the city, and it's with leadership like Sandy that I think we can get there. What I'm going to reflect is what Angelenos are thinking, and let me get over here to the slides if there are up. So if we could go, I don't know who's controlling the PowerPoint. Okay, now next slide, please. And excuse my back to you guys. The Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University is a nonprofit. We try to do research that is focused with civic ideas in mind and how to give voice to people who can't come to meetings like this, who cannot show up to city councils or board of supervisors, but have opinions, and we have to reach out to them, not expect them to constantly be on Zoom or a city council meeting. And it's a luxury that people of leisure or people who in certain professions who can come here today, who can go to a city council, but we need to be more proactive about seeking opinions of Angelenos. This is one of the most important methods of doing it. It's not the only method, but it is the most broad and representative method. And of course, this, I am biased as an academic, that when you do a rigorous survey, you are not selecting people, you're not having them self-select, but you are going out and randomly, proactively seeking a broad perspective. And that's what we are doing here with this survey. Next. This is a survey of 600 representative sample in LA County. We had about 124. Our respondents lived within a certain distance. And see here, you can say we were out in the field collecting this data July 7th through the 19th. It's a 15-minute either telephone or online survey. And it was conducted, as Sandy said, in a multilingual perspective, English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. 600 adults over the age of 18 randomly selected, and 124 within the light blue areas, which meant that they were close to the river. The respondents were asked, obviously, a range of questions, and we had the error margin of about 4%. We always obviously feel that we have to give you this information. You will, as Sandy said, get this report. Next. So the first question is, we have this river, and are you aware that there's a river? And it's sort of like, for most of us in this crowd, it's like, how could you not be aware? But close to 1/4, 17% of Angelinos out of our 10 million Angelinos, or 7.8 million adults, 17% of it are not aware of the river. And so while we like the number of 83%, to me, again, having been aware of the river since I was 4, even before kindergarten, it boggles my mind that close to 1/4 of the population has no awareness of that. Next. But it shows you how we don't use it as a resource, right? I think if we were to ask the question, are you aware of the beach, that LA is on the beach, you would get a much higher percentage, and I think that's one of the questions we may ask, just to have a comparison about this. Have you ever been to the Los Angeles River? And this was, and you say, well, okay, what do you mean by having been? We left it up to the respondent to answer that question. So one of you today who had never been to the river, and you're here and you can see it, that could be defined by you as having been to the river. So having been to the river doesn't mean that you went all the way down, stuck your toe in it, or even tried to bathe in it, or what have you. It meant that you were, from your definition, aware of it, looked at it, saw it. You could have been over a bridge or what have you, okay? But 53% is pretty impressive. And of that, many, 14% had said that many times. Okay, next. And have you ever done any of the following? And here's the different aspects of those who said they had been. And walking, 82%. I don't need to go through all of these. You will have the results, but you can see the different activities. Next. This is just the open-ended questions. We asked, what comes to your mind when you think of the Los Angeles River? Here, we didn't give the respondents a sense of this is what you should say. This is what just came to their mind. Again, you can take a look at it. Obviously, water is number one. Next. If the vision of Los Angeles were a river with more parks, natural access, etc., would you like to visit the river? And of course, 85% said it was likely that they would. Basically, this question is saying that if we invest in the river, will you take advantage of it? And it's overwhelmingly yes. Next. Are you aware that there's a new county master plan? This is pretty impressive that 21% said yes. Now, that doesn't mean that they knew the plan, that they knew all of it, but they knew that there's discussion in the political, governmental, civic space about doing the river. And they may not be speaking specifically about the plan, but they've heard constantly about different aspects about it. Next. And a lot of my comments, in addition to giving you the data, is my interpretation of this. There could be multiple interpretations, and I would encourage people to have these multiple interpretations. The master plan includes many proposals. What would you like to see of the following? And again, a whole long list, very supportive of many of them. You'll get this data. Next. And my apology for going so fast, but I just want to get to the greater discussion. Yes, next, please. Only a couple more slides. Should the following be a high priority, low priority, or not at all priority for revitalizing the river? And here you can see the priority number 1 is habitat for plants and animals, but all along there's support for a variety of different aspects. Next. Throwing a lot of data at you. Don't worry, it won't be an exam, okay? But it's always the people who sit in the front who pay the most attention. In the coming years, millions of dollars from local, state, and federal sources are slated to be spent. Are the following your concerns you have about efforts to revitalize the Los Angeles River? And then homeless encampments is number 1 concern, but taxes may increase. Again, a variety of different answers there. Next. Again, we will give you all this information. Many large cities have turned their once degraded urban river to world-class attractions. How likely do you think that the LA River could become world-class? 64%. Okay, this is showing you that Angelenos believe in this, would like to see this. This, to me, was one of the most optimistic answers that we got. Next. Do you support the efforts to revitalize the river? 91%. Overwhelming. What does that mean? It could mean all kinds of different things, but people are there and there is support. It needs to be mobilized. Next. Would you support or oppose taxes? So even when we start talking about taxes, 40% still support, 51% oppose, and we can break that down in terms of how close you are to the river and the likelihood that you will use it, etc. And so this is a very interesting question and one that has to be dissected to a much greater degree. Next. And that is it. I'm going to turn it back over to Sandy Close. There are over 1,000 crosstabs that we have for the study. We have just shared with you only about 10. And so it's an exhaustive study, much to do, much to describe, and we just don't have the time at this particular moment, but it's just this to whet your appetite about, there is data about how Angelenos feel about this river. Sandy?
Thank you. Thank you so much, and for such a important summary of an extraordinary poll. Again, everybody will get an online version of all the slides and a hard copy at the end of the conference. Now we have a wonderful moderator for the rest of our briefing, John Christensen. And I believe Speaker Brandon is now on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Ando, and I encourage you all, you'll have access online to all of the data to explore it, including the differences among different demographic groups and their priorities on the river. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers for agreeing to play along with this panel. We have made it large to reflect the diversity of the LA River, while it has meant that they need to be very concise in their comments to create space for everyone to speak. Goal is to introduce reporters from the ethnic media, those of you in the room and the 70 or so online, to these great sources on the river in the hope and expectation that this is only the beginning of a very long, constructive, and creative conversation. I encourage you online to introduce yourselves in the chat. Other sources who are here, who are participating online, I will call you out at the end. Organizations and representatives of electeds and agencies. There's about 50 of those of you joining us too. And with that, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce the Speaker of the California Assembly, Anthony Rendon. Speaker Rendon, we're hoping that each of our speakers today will share something of their personal relationship with the river, as well as the work they do on the river. And I wonder if you could start us off on this path by telling us about your relationship to the river, why you've been so passionate about it as a leader in our state, and then give us a quick picture of the quite significant concrete accomplishments that you've achieved for the river in this year's legislature.
Now we are probably ending during a resurgence of COVID, We've gotten quite a bit done, and today at midnight is when we have to constitutionally end our year. So it's been a long week and a tremendous year, but I think we've gotten a lot done for the state and quite a bit done for the river as well. In terms of my personal experience with the river, I think my experiences with the river are similar to the experiences that a lot of Angelinas have had. As a child, it was always something that you sort of went past, either on a bus or a car. Sometimes you rode your bike past. And you didn't really think much about it. I didn't think much about the history. Didn't think much about its place in the city fabric. And it certainly was not something I ever thought about in terms of potential. As I started working in the nonprofit sector and got more involved in community sort of on my own, realized what a tremendous resource it was for the people in that community. When we talk about the river, we always talk about the future. We always talk about things that can happen with respect to recreation and all of those types of wonderful things. And I'm glad we're having those conversations. But I think it's important to remember how the tremendous amount of use it has already. Based on everybody's background there, the weather looks a little nicer there than it is here. I would imagine there are a lot of folks on the river right now, 11:30 a.m. in Los Angeles, up and down the course of the river, baby strollers, jogging, bikes, as they do every day. But at the same time, while it's utilized, we also know that to a large extent we could do better, that those resources could be improved, need to be improved, and could better, rather than sort of being an open wound, a border between communities, it can actually be a bridge and bring communities together. With respect to the past couple of years in Sacramento, I'm proud particularly of our efforts. When my friend Fernando Guerra talks about 91% of folks in LA County being in favor of revitalization of the river, revitalization efforts, I think that's because of the outreach efforts of a lot of folks who I see on the screen in front of us. We have been incredibly involved in making sure that folks know about the revitalization efforts. I think Fernando said about 21% of folks know of the master plan. As someone who works in government every day, that's an incredible number. For people to be aware of the efforts that the county and all of their partners are engaged in terms of revitalization for the river. We've also, I think, begun to have an open conversation about the uneven development along the river. A lot of the efforts have been along the upper river. Great, fantastic. I'm supportive of those and want to continue to be supportive of those. But I think we've seen in recent years more attention being paid to the lower river, and I want to thank the county for that, Gary and Associates for that. But more than anything, I want to thank the residents of the lower river communities who have gone out over the course of the past several years, have gone out of their way to talk about the sort of rendering, their own personal renderings, their communal renderings, their visions of what they want the river to look like. One of the things that we've talked about in my district in Southeast Los Angeles County is a cultural arts center. When we started doing kind of a needs assessment in the community, even when I got sworn in as speaker in 2016, in 2016, we were trying to find an appropriate space for the swearing in ceremony and couldn't find one. We ended up using a park, which was great, but a lot of the community amenities that exist in other parts of the community, whether it's for the arts, culture, just sort of communal spaces, didn't exist in Southeast Los Angeles County. So the state made a tremendous investment this year, $45 million in the Southeast Los Angeles Cultural Arts Center, which will be sort of in the city of Southgate, in the northern part of my district. what is my district right now anyway, prior to redistricting. It's a tremendous opportunity for us in Southeast Los Angeles County to sort of talk about and lend our own voices to the conversation about art and culture in Los Angeles. I think that's incredibly important. The fact that it's on the river, the fact that it speaks to the river, the fact that it complements the river, I think says a lot about the design and it says a lot about our efforts in and along the river. So I think we've made tremendous progress over the course of the past several years, but it's important that we continue to be vigilant. We in Southeast Los Angeles County have been disappointed in the past with a lot of efforts, whether relating to community efforts, political efforts. And we want to make sure that we continue to work on this and that we bring all of these efforts to fruition. There are a lot of things, good things happening in the river already. There are Orchard and Southgate, other efforts in and around the river in Southeast Los Angeles County. We want to make sure that those continue. And then again, the entire river, the upper river, the lower river, continues to be revitalized throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Rendon, and good luck these final hours. And out for our audience, also in some of the last hours and days of the legislature of $154 million appropriation for urban rivers, and particularly for throughout California, and particularly for high-need communities on those stretches of the urban rivers. So Los Angeles River, of course, one of them, the Rio Hondo, the San Gabriel, as well as rivers in Stockton and rivers in San Diego that need this kind of love and attention the LA River is getting. I'd like to next introduce Tensho Takamori from Gary Partners, visionaries for reimagining the river as architects of important projects proposed on the river, including a Frank Gehry designed cultural center in Southeast Los Angeles that the speaker referred to. And also as important architects, new LA County, LA River Master Plan. Tensho, you stressed that we should be talking about reimagining the river. And why is that word, that concept, so important, reimagining?
Well, I think our team and the steering committee associated with developing the master plan up a lot in studying all of the work that has been done to date and building on that work. And I think one of the things we saw was that revitalization, at least locally, was associated with specific types of solutions for the river. Natural solutions which have their place and are very valid to pursue were possible. But I think what we started to see, based on some of the research, we're looking to broaden kind of our view on what the possible solutions were. We needed to broaden that range in order to find appropriate solution to meet all the goals. There's a lot of great priorities from this poll, but one has to understand when you dig in and look at the data, many of them are in conflict. So how do you find resolution for many of these that are in conflict that allows them to coexist? And I think that, through the expansive data research we did, has found a wider range of solutions to reimagine what this river is. We have to understand it's a designed river now. It will be designed river in the future because of its main core requirement for flood management. We have the ability to reimagine it in many different ways. We also, I think, in our planning have a way to reimagine it in a much broader scope, not just to focus on water, ecology, and open space issues, but to understand that there are other issues that are associated when you make plans and when you make improvements. Those issues relative to displacement, affordable housing issues, people experiencing homelessness issues, arts and culture, accessibility and continued engagement. And I think that's why you see the 9 goals in the master plan represent a pretty wide spectrum of the issues that we're all facing here in the region. That the river, we believe, can be kind of a leader for change on many of those that hopefully will affect on a wider regional scale. So that's why the word reimagine for us is really important as we move forward and discuss any of the issues associated with the river.
Number 3, yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, Tencho. And I want to stress that everyone will be available also for one-on-one interviews when we're done, and everybody is moving through so clearly and concisely and nicely that we'll also have time for Q&A. I'd like to next introduce Max Podemsky, who's the planning director for Nuri Martinez, the president of the Los Angeles City Council. Max, you worked at Pacoima Beautiful, a community-based environmental justice organization in one of LA's highest need communities on a tributary of the LA River. You now work for City Council President Nuri Martinez, who represents that district. Can you start there on the tributary, on the Pacoima Wash, and give us a picture of the diversity of communities and interests, projects and promises, jurisdictions and possibilities of the LA River watershed? I know it's asking a lot. Is this diversity a problem, or does this messiness create opportunities?
Sure. Well, thank you. It's great to be with people again in person. And yeah, so a little bit of background. I work for Nuri Martinez, who's the president of the LA City Council. I actually started working for her back in 2008 when she was the executive director of an organization called Pacoima Beautiful. And it was really wonderful hearing Rudy speak at the beginning and, you know, mentioning Pacoima and sort of its centrality to the river and its geography. Here in LA County as sort of the entrance where the Tujunga and the Pacoima washes come into the San Fernando Valley, two of the main tributaries of the LA River. And so, you know, my boss back in 2008, it was sort of when a lot of the original work around the LA River, particularly in this section, was happening, talking about revitalizing it, turning it into a greenway. And Pacoima Beautiful, as an environmental justice organization, its main goal was really to fight against negative land uses coming into the community. So factories, freeways, an airport, basically all the negative land uses that no other neighborhood wants ends up in communities like the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And her idea was, you know, this work is happening, you know, down in LA on the LA River. Let's also work to bring in positive amenities into Pacoima because we don't have enough parks and open space, we don't have green space, so our community can use it. So she led a community-based effort to revitalize the Pacoima Wash. It produced 2 vision plans for the Pacoima Wash, one for the upper Pacoima Wash, one for the lower Pacoima Wash, and the Pacoima Diversion Channel. And those have been really successful. They garnered a Transformative Climate Communities grant from the state for $25 million. But I think it sort of goes back to what John was just mentioning is, I think it's important that we sort of broaden the vision of the LA River. I mean, the LA River alone, the 51 miles, is very ambitious. But if we look at all the tributaries throughout the county, it touches basically every community in the county. If you think about Pacoima Wash, Ballona Creek, Arroyo Seco. And a lot of those communities are some of our most park poor, you know, low-income communities of color that really need this open space. And in a city that is, you know, so park poor and also built out, it also really presents an opportunity to sort of re-envision this sort of single-use infrastructure that's main goal now is sort of flood protection as a multi-benefit use that has open space, takes stormwater, provides habitat, and all these things. And just sort of to close on your question, I think, you know, LA is often, I think, criticized as sort of being this collection of suburbs in search of a city. I think in some ways that's really the city's strength because it is incredibly diverse, not just, you know, in ethnicity, but also geography and neighborhood. And I think it presents a challenge when we're talking about master plans, right? Because master plans are sort of imposing, you know, one vision on a river that goes through all these diverse neighborhoods. But I think the Pacoima Wash and what is happening in Southeast LA shows is that it's really an opportunity for communities to express their own vision for the river and for these tributaries and revitalize it in a way that reflects those communities. And I think that's also ultimately a way to, combat gentrification and some of these negative issues, to have people have ownership over it and have a public space that really reflects their community. So thank you.
Thanks, Max. And Pacoima, of course, being on what we call the upper Los Angeles River, so from roughly, not quite here, a little bit farther down towards downtown LA and up through the San Fernando Valley. I'd like to kind of stay somewhat in that territory and introduce Sarah Rascone, who is the Environmental Equity Officer at the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, who works a lot on this stretch of the river that we'll see if anyone wants to go down with us after this briefing to see the river here. And Sarah is the first ever environmental equity officer at a state conservancy, something that I'm tremendously interested in. Sarah, as with others, I'd like to ask you to start by telling us what draws you to the river, what inspires you about the river, and then I'd like you to step back and tell us about MRCA's vision for the river and what it means to put equity at the center of that vision.
Thank you, John. So as mentioned, my name is Sarah Rascone, and I'm the first environmental equity officer for a public agency, the Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority. We're a local joint powers authority comprised of a state conservancy and 2 park districts. And upon reading the data from the poll, like many, I grew up in a Latino household, a Spanish-speaking household, and unlike the poll data, I did not know there was a river, let alone visit the river growing up in Los Angeles, no more than 15 minutes from where we are today, in El Sereno, which is the neighborhood furthest east in the city of Los Angeles. And like many families, my family prioritized working, paying bills, putting food on the table. And we didn't know that we were part of environmental consciousness, but we were doing it, right? It was don't run the water because the water bill's gonna be high. Or to beat the heat, we didn't have a pool, but my grandmother would let us play outside and water her garden and get us with the water hose. So we were practicing environmental consciousness and I didn't know it. And I believe that's really what instilled my passion for the environment. So when I went to school and came back, my first job was with the William C. Velasquez Institute, the late Antonio Gonzalez. And I was in charge of building an environmental curriculum for inner city youth. So that was my first exposure to the LA River. And Antonio Gonzalez gave me a fantastic tour that I'll never forget and helped me understand the history, right? The river has gone through so many different phases of life, from its origins when our tribal ancestors cared for the river and only took what they needed. And then, LA got very densely populated. We had other settlers come. The river was then channelized because we built too closely to it. It's gone through a lot. And I grew up during the time when we neglected the river, which it sounds like, Fernando, so did you. So I consider that the 80s and 90s, I'll say, even early 2000s. But now there's a renewed interest and more people than ever know about the river, and that's what the poll is telling us. And there is a renewed interest and vigor to revitalize and care for our river. So the work that my agency does is we develop and purchase open space along the river, in the floodplain, in the upper LA River specifically, and develop multi-benefit, multi-purpose projects. So like Max alluded to, the river was and is very much a singular purpose, right? A channel to get water out quickly because of that historic flooding. But now with this renewed focus, we realize that we can do so much more. And we can treat the water, we can recreate, we can bring people. I've heard the LA River called our urban beach, if you will. But the water quality is tested 3 times a week now. Like I said, there's recreation. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my agency helps manage the 2 designated river recreation zones. Many don't know, but in 2010, the LA River became deemed a navigable waterway by the US EPA. I mean, these are amazing strides for what was a wild river, so wild that it had to be contained when, we didn't know better, to be quite honest. And now there is this new interest and several planning documents. My agency also helped develop another plan. So there's lots of plans, right? There's the Deployment Vision Plan, the County Master Plan. We helped develop the Upper LA River and Tributaries Plan. One of our working group members and two of our Conservancy members are here today, Miguel and Rudy. So thank you guys for your leadership. It's through those that sit on these boards and these working groups with community input that help drive future planning. And we can't do it without the community, but like Fernando mentioned, that's a luxury to be able to attend a meeting. So we are really trying to be better as an agency about going to people where they are, offering an incentive. Come to our meeting at this museum. It's a science museum, but it'll be a free community meeting. We've hosted several meetings at the Discovery Cube in the San Fernando Valley. So that's a little bit about the work that we do. You know, I see the river as several things, but you know, with this new universal interest and a desire from all ages and backgrounds, we can do so much and create these permeable surfaces and take out the concrete along the river, if not in the river, you know, recharge our aquifers. I'm getting into technical terms. I did not always know all of this, but you learn it. I took an unconventional career for my grandmother in the environment. You know, in her eyes, you were a cop or a doctor and that's a career. But I've shown others, and that's part of my passion, is to bring other people into the space that look like me and come from my background.
Well, we're so glad you're there and doing it, Sarah. And just, I mean, all of these folks are just scratching the surface of the stories that they have to share with you, the perspectives, the deep dive into permeable pavements and plants and anywhere else that you would like to go. The contact information is available in your kit, and we'll distribute the link to all of that to everybody online as well. I'd like to turn to the lower LA River and one of your counterparts there, and Lowell, I think he's on the Zoom, and that's Mark Stanley, who's the director of the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. And so that's the conservancy that's responsible for the lower LA River largely, from that part of the river from downtown all the way out to the sea at San Pedro and Long Beach. And Mark, as with Sarah, I'd like to ask you to start by telling us what draws you to the river, what inspires you about the river, and then step back and talk to us about RMC, the Rivers and Mountain Conservancy's vision for the river, and what it means for you all to also put equity at the center of that vision, as I know you do.
Great. Yeah, I see a couple thumbs up, so that's great. It's funny that you want to. So if I step back from RMC and I talk a little bit about what draws me to the river, it's really what draws me to, the outdoors and just being outside, because my ancestors saw the outdoors as a way of survival. Right? We didn't look at it as a way of recreation, because we were actually trying to escape slavery. I actually didn't grow up here on the West Coast. I grew up on the East Coast. My relatives are from Dorchester County. Most of you probably will relate Dorchester County to Harriet Tubman, which we're all related to. And actually, I had members of my family who were escaped as part of the Underground Railroad. So we looked at the outdoors a little differently in the beginning, because we were trying to escape, this system that was, was not good for us. Can you think of, if you think of people, they would literally leave shelter to escape the tyranny that they were going under, right? Can you think of a situation like that you're going to leave the shelter of an environment and escape in the woods and not know where that's going to lead you to? So that's what brought me to looking at the environment, looking at what I can do to help people to understand that this is a valuable resource for us, and we need to make sure that we provide means to keep it and continue that value as a resource to people. So when I joined, I've been with the RMC for 10 years. We do lots of work over 1,400 square miles. We start in the headwaters of the San Gabriel River. That gives part of our name. And we have that lower half of the Los Angeles River, basically below the city of Los Angeles. And as we've been talking today, this river is a major asset to the metropolitan area of Los Angeles. All of it, the 51 miles is a major asset. We've used it for flood protection. We're going to continue to use it for flood protection. We've built up against the banks of how we channelize the river. So that's going to continue because there's value in making sure that it doesn't flood the communities. But that doesn't mean we have to have a singular use. And that doesn't mean we have to not look at it as a river like they do in Tahoe, like they do in the Sierras. It's a major asset to our community, and we need to look at it in a multiple of ways. While this is an urban environment, and the RMC is probably the most unique conservancy of the 10 conservancies across the state, because we have 68 cities within the RMC's funding area. That's very unique for any conservancy in the state. The rest of the conservancies are mostly foothill areas along the coast, up in the mountains, preserving a lot of our natural open space. So we have unique opportunities of how do we implement programs to preserve open space and provide additional opportunities for passive recreation, to benefit these very built up, urbanized communities. But it is there. We see the habitat. We see the diversity of the ecosystem that's in the metropolitan area. Every time you step out your door and you walk down the street, you're actually witnessing it too. You just don't relate it to if you go up in the Sierras and you see these great forests and open space. But it actually is within the urban area, and that's what we're trying to bring back, maintain, and have a consistency in terms of providing benefits throughout the entire region. Schoolyards, alleys, corridors can all be greened. That's all opportunities for us. This LA River is a major opportunity for us to green the river corridor, provide opportunity for those communities that are adjacent to it. We've got 14 different jurisdictions that we work with. We put together a working group several years ago. We spent 2 years bringing the community out. We had 14 different organizations that met around the table, including all the municipalities along the river, all the NGOs that were very interested in doing this type of work, and the community at large. While we had 40 members that were part of the working group, I can tell you every meeting we had more than 100 people that would show up. So there was great interest in what we were doing and having those discussions about how we can enhance this river and talking about not only the open space opportunities, but as Tencho mentioned, there's a lot of other things that are going on in communities, and we recognize that in those discussions, because it's not just about one aspect, but how do we move forward and work with this all together, right? How do you increase mobility, provide better access? How do you look at the encampment issues? How do you look at housing and integrate that into open space? How do you look at the communities that want to create greater economic development and integrate that in without creating displacement and gentrification, so those who live along the corridor today can continue to benefit? Those are all the issues that we have to tackle in the work that we do. And we're honored that we're in the middle of doing these things. Doing that planning process and revitalization plan, and now we have the master plan. There were some signature projects that came out, particularly along the tributaries of the Rio Hondo and along Compton Creek. The Cultural Center will be located there at the tributary where the LA River and a Rio Hondo comes into it. That's a signature. You see some of the master planning concepts in the county's master plan as well as the revitalization plan for the lower river. There's so much opportunity. There's so much that we can do in terms of working with the communities to create these greater benefits for the people who live along the corridor today. We're looking at continuing to work with the cities, continuing to work with those agencies that met us around the table over that 2-year process to move these efforts forward. I saw someone actually put in the chat that there was spawning that occurred. One of the things that we're looking at is even steelhead. Is there an opportunity for steelhead to be back in the river? I mean, we need to open our eyes to these types of visions in creating these types of opportunities. So thank you for letting me join you today. We have several projects that are very active along the corridor in terms of building more sustainable projects. We're also looking at ways that you can operate and maintain those facilities over a long period of time so they're sustainable, that they're not just this one shot. We put in capital money and then there's not a way to sustain these projects over time. So that's probably the newer way of thinking, is that you build something and you also at the same time look at how to sustain it and how do you create a management governance structure when you have so many jurisdictions that you have to work with. So we're looking at, while we are an agency mostly focused on open space, habitat protection, and passive recreation, we realize that those other elements are very important to what we do. Sustainability, and how do you manage these efforts over a long period of time.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. That's a great
So thank you.
hopeful note of thinking about the steelhead trout, ocean-going species coming back to the river someday. I think as you look into the poll numbers, you'll see that there's quite a bit of visionary optimism among LA County residents about what's possible. I'd like to next stay on the lower LA River at the confluence of the Rio Hondo and the Los Angeles River and introduce you to Belén Bernal. Belén is the former mayor of Southgate, the city at the confluence there of the LA River and the Rio Hondo. And she is now the executive director of an organization called Nature for All. And Belén, I'd like to ask you to speak from your perspective as the mayor of Southgate about what the reimagining, the revitalization, whatever we decide to call it on the LA River means for your city. And then to zoom out in your role now at Nature for All, to talk about what it means for other communities as well that have endured decades of disinvestment and now see the opportunities as well as the risks of reinvestment as the river comes back to the center of our lives in LA.
Well, thank you, John and Sandy and everyone really for being here to discuss a really important topic. Better? Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone. As Mark mentioned before I answer the questions here, it really takes someone to champion these efforts. We can create plans. We can say this is going to be a one-time effort. But for me, as former mayor of my hometown of Southgate, it's very important to acknowledge, leadership at the state level, federal level, that are really taking on the conversations that they're having, at that coffee table with a resident or at the local coffee shop with our parks director or whatnot, to that next level. So to Assemblymember and Speaker Rendon, I commend you for not only talking about the need to have a lower LA River working group, but actually bringing the resources to the region, right? A lot of folks like me who grew up in the inner city, we relate to the river in many ways. Some do go biking, some do go walking with their children. For me, I go back to my days traveling to Mexico when my parents finally became residents and going through the Sierras of Jalisco, right? The river to me was a place where we could bathe in, we could play in, while we saw women washing on the other end, while we saw animals downstream drinking water. and folks watering their crops. So, you know, I think we have so much to learn from history, right? It was mentioned by the tribal representation and just different individuals that I continue to come across now as Executive Director for Nature for All. It's really important to look at the history and see what we can learn from them to reimagine a space that, yes, unfortunately, it's concrete, it's needed, it's been that way for so many years, but what's next? So as someone who represented a community where I grew up, where my children, grew up, heavily impacted by pollution, lack of green space, and really spaces to recreate in general, I don't want to think of that next child that's born and that they're going to have 10 years less of life just because they grew up in an area that is heavily polluted. I want to be able to say, no, there are spaces that you can recreate locally. You can do it at Southgate Park. You could go up to Holladale. You can cross over to, Downey, Bell Gardens, over at Maywood. But the reality is that it's not enough. We're densely populated. So while on council, we took into account different efforts. We have an amazing team that develops projects like the Urban Orchard that was discussed earlier. That's really taking advantage of county efforts, Measure W, right? Looking at hopefully in the near future, Measure A as well, with the county RPOSD. And I think we need to really be strategic in having all these efforts that we're discussing and seeing how we can combine those resources to really make a true difference. So that obesity levels, asthma levels, heart disease are not impacting our communities the way that they are today. And now as Executive Director of Nature for All, I really believe that our mission is to prepare the next environmental leaders that need to be conscious of these conversations. I didn't grow up thinking about this, similar to Sarah's experience, but it's something that we do. We recycle naturally, right? By not throwing away that Tupperware, to reuse it and repurpose it. So how do we get there, right? We get there through educational and cultural programming. Nature for All has been a social and environmental justice organization, but also in form of a coalition to really champion efforts of connecting community to public lands, policies around park space, equity, water quality and equity as well. How do we get there? We work with our youth. We educate them about these important topics and have them really become those next diverse environmental leaders that have to reflect the makeup of our county. It's changing. And I think large organizations, long-standing historical organizations acknowledge that, and they realize that positions like Sarah's, for example, need to exist at all levels of government. And really, in reaching out to my former city staff, they need help. They're overwhelmed with their day-to-day activities. So they need, the agencies, they need the legislatures, they need the nonprofits to really come to the table and say, how can we help you? Are we gonna write that grant proposal to have outdoor equity, monies to bring our students out? We need that. They don't have the resources internally. So, I thank you, and I hate talking with a mask here, but really the passion is to make sure that we're being responsible to build those next environmental leaders. Otherwise, who's going to protect? So let's do it together. Thank you for this conversation, John.
Thank you, Belen. One of the other findings in the poll that was really astonishing to me, in addition to the 91% support for efforts at reimagining, revitalizing, restoring along the LA River, those are the kinds of numbers that we see for the California coast. When we do polls statewide, that 90% of Californians say the condition of our coast and oceans and beaches matters to them. Imagine that 90% say for this river that needs so much work, as we know that they support doing that work. And that is consistent whether people live within a mile of the river or farther away in the rest of LA County. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Damon Nagami, who's a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council, an advisory board member of Friends of the Los Angeles River, and one of the founders of the Los Angeles Regional Open Space and Affordable Housing Collaborative, La Rosa. Damon, I think as that introduction affirms, we ask you to join us as someone who has the whole river in mind in the work that you do, and not just the river, but the communities along the river and beyond. And looking at that big picture and the long history of the river, could I ask you to help situate us in the here and now? Where are we right now in the story of the Los Angeles River?
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with all these river champions up here. It's in this lovely setting here at Clock Shop. Thank you for having this briefing. I appreciate the poll results. It confirms what we've seen with our members and our activists, which is widespread support for river restoration across races and ethnicities. This absolutely corroborates what happens on the ground. John had asked sort of where are we now? You know, I see this as a real turning point for the LA River. I heard someone earlier talking about turning a dream into reality, and I think that's where we are. I think this is both an exciting time and a concerning time, and I want to talk about both of those. Personally, for me, this is very exciting. I grew up in Orange County, where concrete channels like the LA River are ubiquitous. Anyone who's grown up in Orange County probably has one of these concrete channels near them. When I was little, we would, go down there and we'd throw rocks, we'd look for frogs, we'd ride down the channel to the beach. But like so many other speakers have said, didn't really think of it as, a place or imagine what it could be. And I never dreamed of something that could be more natural, like a soft bottom river that other cities and other places have. But it's within reach, and I think it's really thrilling. As someone else had said, sort of, getting into the environmental advocacy sphere, you meet people, then you realize that other people have a vision. And so many folks have contributed to this. One of those important people is Lewis McAdams. He was a poet and a visionary, and he had a vision of an LA River that could be a place. And you could give a real sense of place to Angelenos. There was a question about, have you ever been to the river? And I, might not have known how to answer that question before, because why would you go to a place that isn't a place or isn't sort of designated or created to be a place for people to go to? So to have that gathering place for Angelenos was something that a lot of folks, including Lewis, had in mind when they were envisioning what river restoration could be. Lewis talked a lot about turning back toward the river instead of turning your back to the river, which is what Los Angeles and Angelenos had done for so long. That has been a vision, it's been a journey, and we're getting closer to that place. I'm here as a representative of a nonprofit group. It could have been so many others, because there are so many terrific advocates that have done this work for so long. It takes a village, and even before Lewis, there were folks who had been wanting change to come to these communities. And for us to be able to take up that mantle and work on behalf of these communities to create a place for them is really special. In the middle of all that excitement, there are also concerns. So the place where we are right now, we have some really important choices to make. River restoration is really important, but turning that dream into reality can come with some real concerns and problems. There are real resources here now. We heard about $45 million for Southeast Los Angeles. That is unthinkable, and a dream that's really becoming reality just in the last few years. It's amazing. But it also introduces the concepts like speculation, land speculation, and folks trying to cash in on public benefits in a way that might not benefit the communities that are there. We heard a little bit about displacement and gentrification. Those are things that are on many of our groups' radar now. For my organization, NRDC, it's definitely been a learning and a growing experience. I think many environmental groups had tunnel vision for so long. It's like, we really want to green the river, we want river restoration, while not understanding that, I heard someone say, other things are going on in the community. The community has other issues that are happening, housing issues, homelessness, potentially being displaced from where you've been living in these historic communities, especially lower income black and brown communities. And we need to be sensitive to that. And as a member of a white-led organization in a very white-dominant area as conservation, this is not something that was always on our radar. So to be able to learn and grow and lean into addressing those issues and taking them head on, it's been a journey. It's been one that I've been proud to sort of be part of. Because it is a river for all of us. I think that's the theme here. And not displacing or gentrifying communities so that the folks that you're building these amenities for can enjoy them, I think is really an important point. There are opportunities here for equitable community development that can thrive as part of the river restoration process. But we have to be intentional and build those policies and structures into the process as we're moving forward with river restoration. We don't want to be disappointed, and we don't want the communities to be disappointed in the way that the speaker was mentioning earlier. And I just want to close with like a bright spot that I took away from this polling is that Angelinos recognize that these challenges exist and these concerns exist, and they support river restoration anyway. They overwhelmingly support the fact that we can have a restored river here in Los Angeles, and that's encouraging to me. That tells me that people still believe that we can do big things, even though there are challenges, even though there are barriers in the way. They want us to keep going, they want to keep going, they want to be part of that journey. And that's encouraging to me, and that buoys me, and I hope it buoys many of our colleagues in this work as we move forward. So thank you all for being here, appreciate it.
Amen. As you look at the poll, you'll see that residents around LA County share those concerns, and the concern that we work on those things as well, as we're talking about reimagining the LA River. Damon pointed out that there's a lot of people in the room, and there's a lot of people in the virtual room with us today who could be on this panel. And I would just like to call out some of them at this point. If you're in the room, stand up and jump around and wave your hands so that people, the reporters, can see you. If you're in the virtual room, give a thumbs up or something, introduce yourself in the chat so that folks can get in touch with you, the reporters especially. The mayor's office, Mayor Garcetti's office and the LA River Works office in the mayor's office are here with the Bureau of Engineering. LA County Public Works, which is also the houses the Los Angeles Flood Control District, are here. Representatives from the office of U.S. Senator Padilla, from State Senator Lena Gonzalez's office, from State Senator Henry Stern's office, from House of Representatives member Adam Schiff's office, and from Assembly member Luz Rivas' office. Raul Macias from Anahuac Youth Sports. I know he's here somewhere. He may be looking for some shade, and his colleague Diana Molina, great sources for you to talk to in the community. Diana works with Anahuac and with Trust for Public Land. Hugo Garcia, who's working on the Bowtie parcel planning just across the river. Jessica Prieto from East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. Mark Hanna from Geosyntec, Catherine Pease from Heald Bay, Tilly Hinton from LA River X, Bruce Resnick from LA Waterkeeper, Metabolic Studio was in the room and is there. Thank you. Kate Moulin from River LA, Kelsey Jessup from the Nature Conservancy and colleagues there, and Alex Paxton from the Water Foundation, and some special guests, young and upcoming leaders in the fellows in public affairs from Coro. Thanks for joining us this morning. Raise your hand and wave if you'd like to chat with young leaders who are getting a deep immersion in the LA River right now. I'm quite excited about that. With that, I'd like to turn to Miguel Luna, who is with an organization called Urban Semillas, or Urban Seeds, and much, much, much more. it's hard to introduce Miguel adequately. We could be very long time here just trying to figure out how to introduce all that Miguel does on the LA River and for the LA River. So let me ask Miguel to give us an introduction. And I know, Miguel, you grew up with a special relationship with the river in another country. And as an immigrant, you developed a special relationship with the LA River. Why is that relationship so important to you and others on the river? And how do you see cultivating that relationship over time?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, that's pretty much it. When you ask the initial question of what draws you to the river, and it's really about relationships. You know, as a very young kid, as John mentioned, that was our church. Every Sunday, my dad and my mom would get on a motorcycle and, you know, drive almost 100 miles to a river called Las Piedras in Colombia, Cucuta, where I was born. And a kinship formed with that river. And, you know, I migrated here at the age of 9 years old and found the river down the street by Knox, and at 13. And I'm 50 today, and I was 13, so over 3 decades. And, you know, a lot of things have changed. We used to be chased by pit bulls, and it was more fences and less cafes and as it exists today. So I think for me it's always been about continuing to build on that relationship that was formed with that river in my country and seek that with the Los Angeles River and the San Gabriel River and the tributaries and every body of water. I think is always been a draw to me, and it's given me so much. And so for me, it's a way to be able to stay engaged with a friend, stay engaged in building that relationship, and perhaps provide others that opportunity to reconnect or learn about why that relationship is so important. I do want to highlight, you know, that it's not always the best relationship, just like in life. You know, several years back, 2 kids died in the LA River down very close from here. You know, and one kid jumped in, couldn't swim. His best friend jumped in right after him. He didn't know how to swim either, and they both drowned. And so I think when we're looking at improving the physical infrastructure of the river, we also have to look, just like we talk about, it's not a linear body of water, it's a watershed. I think we also have to look at the social watershed of what we're trying to improve. If we could talk about why people of color don't swim, then we can enter into a conversation about the needs as we're improving this physical infrastructure, the needs to also improve the social infrastructure of it. And briefly, I'll say that, you know, Damon, when he talked about this relationship, I'll briefly say that for me, I'm really drawn to, and I've been talking about this for the last 3 years, about the 4 pillars of attraction and how that's applied to community. And the 4 pillars of attraction are physical appearance, geography, similarity, and reciprocity. And I think, you know, physical appearance, obviously, you know, one person attracted to another, that first impression is key. And I think we need to work really good at ensuring that that physical appearance is attractive to the people that have been living here and adjacent to the river for a long time. It's our responsibility to do so. When we talk about geography, you know, in the UK they did a study that most of the people that are married, and not that that's the only measure of it, but that were married had met between 5 and 10 kilometers from each other. And that's why, you know, people that work together enter a relationship. People that see each other a lot enter into relationships. So, you know, we need to be conscientious of that, of how the geography, if we're going to do engagement about the river, that we start from the most close proximity, because those are the people that are spending the most time next to it. Similarity, you know, we're attracted to people that potentially, you know, we grew up accustomed to. And so that means body shape, height, I mean everything. And so that's similar, and you know, they say that it's not so much that, you know, I'm a Virgo and there's another sign that I'm attracted to or they're attracted to me, but it's more that we both care about astrology as a way to measure why we should be together. And so that similarity is key when you apply it to the river, in the sense that will that place, will those improvements mirror what the community is used to seeing and not be a shock that is so far away that people will just not like it. And then the last is reciprocity, and I'll end there, John. And it's that, you know, the toll that it takes to get out of work early, to sacrifice a Saturday with family, to attend a meeting. We've been asking so much of community, and the community has been so good about providing their input, their knowledge, their expertise. So I think they've given, and so these projects really have to have some reciprocity, to give back to the community that have invested so much of their time, so much of their passion, so much of their intuition in what they value. So I think that's very key. And you know, the data here that you did, Fernando, is amazing. I mean, the creating more points of access as a way, and I'm so glad that Sarah is in her role, because equity is about access. And you have this number of saying 86% want more access points. And so, and I'm interested in the subs of, you know, by ethnicity and by income of where, you know, who wants concrete removed? Is that based on income? Who wants more nature space? But just not to leave it out there that people of color don't care about nature. What was really cool was to see that people under 40,000 enjoyed more bird watching than those over 125,000. That to me was beautiful to see. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. Miguel's done what I loved doing, which was also, you'll have access to the full data. It's a long report, but it's really worth going through and just looking at where are some of those interesting differences that fall outside of the margin of error. And especially if they fall well outside the margin of error, there might be something really going on here. Like you pointed out, that low-income people enjoy bird watching more than other groups and want to see it continued. And there's some other fascinating things about those kinds of findings, as well as different ethnic groups. And so the difference in preferences are there, while the support is overwhelming across those differences. And I'd like to ask Fernando to say briefly, I mean, this has kind of been something like a focus group responding to your poll in a way. What have you learned from these different stories reflecting on the poll?
Thank you, John. Exactly. These beautiful, diverse, profound voices that you just heard give context to these very large numbers. We interviewed 600 people that represent the 7.8 million LA County adult Angelenos, but these voices that you just heard today represent hundreds of thousands of different perspectives that in similarity that we have had. I'll leave you with this. There is a unifying, unitary perspective of Angelenos about the river, that it is an important resource and it must be invested in, and it must be prepared for the current and future generations. This unitary vision comes into conflict with the fragmentation of our governmental system, where we have cities, the county, large cities, the federal government, state government, and this fragmentation oftentimes gets in the way of this unifying vision that Angelenos have. And this is something that we have to overcome. And there's a lot of interagencies and intergovernmental workshops and what have you. Sometimes people holding on to their jurisdiction, holding on to their funding, holding on to their decision making, and it's getting in the way of what Angelenos want is very clear. Government is supposed to be for what people want. Angelenos want this river back. We want it to be a resource for all of us in a multifaceted manner. This survey is clear. Angelenos have spoken. All of these intergovernmental agencies have to get going. Thank you.
Wow, that's a clarion call to action. What I want to do next is to open up for all of the reporters in the room to have opportunities to talk with all of you one-on-one. We will also go, anybody who wants to go with me down to the river to talk about it, we'll do that. But I want to ask Rudy Ortega to say a few words about what he has heard in these other voices on the river, here on the panel, and in the poll.
Thank you, John, for the opportunity. One thing I heard is an echo of compassion and understanding, and also revitalizing and straightening out the river. And it's key. It's something that, from my perspective as a tribal person and people who have been using the river for generations, even the tributaries. My father used to take us to Big Tahunga and the watering hole over there, and we spend weekends up there. And the families continue to do it continuously to today. And that river means that. And to hearing the folks here on the panel echoing the same compassion and understanding and saying we need access to the river, and not just for some, but for all. And we need to continue bridging up those connections with each and every one of us in this diverse community we call Los Angeles. So I appreciate everyone's comments and sentiments here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. So we're going to go next to one-on-one interviews for the folks who are here in the room. And for those of you online, please be in touch. We can help connect you with any interviews that you want to pursue stories, these rich stories on the LA River. And Sandy, do you want to close?
I just want to give a huge shout out to our media partners for joining us here on site and on Zoom. You are our voice, you are our platform, you are our hope for engaging diverse communities in this wonderful opportunity to reimagine the river. So thank you to our media for coming.
And you can pick up a copy of the poll presentation as you leave, and we can also provide you with a link to the full data report. Thank you.
So my question is, this plan, this reimagine of the river plan here, how far are we in right now to this plan?
Sure. So the county wrote its own master plan for the river in 1996. And there's been many plans that have been developed since that plan. None of them took the whole river into account, primarily for jurisdictional reasons. And so the county hired our team, which includes our office, but also Olin, Geosyntic, street level advisors, and a robust kind of suite of community engagement people and companies as well in the beginning of 2018. We went through a strong in-person, online survey technique of community engagement, did a lot of data research, had a steering committee with 41 members guiding us that we met with regularly for approximately a year and a half or so to develop the plan. The plan went through a draft review with the county and the internal steering committee, and then it went to a public draft that was open for public comment from January through May. So the public comment period closed in May. This year. The county parallel did a programmatic EIR, so the CEQA process would kind of parallel the planning process. We're in the process now of incorporating responses, modifications to those public comments, which we hope would be able to go to the board late this year or the beginning of next year, which would allow it to be certified.
I see. Is the plan going through the entire stretch of the river, or is that only a part, like the upper, the lower, like what I heard?
So one of the keys is that it's meant to include all of the existing plans that are partial, and it includes all 51 miles of the LA River. It does not include all the extents of the tributaries. I think there was a framework of time that had to be considered. And really what it's meant to do is create, hopefully, a planning guidelines that could be expanded up any of the tributaries. As much of the data research, it's not narrow to just the river, but it's countywide.
I see. So what do you think about the impact to our Asian community? I mean, is it like a big impact or?
Well, I think, what we have to acknowledge and what the plan tries to do is that we can have a debate or a disagreement about what types of improvements should be. But any improvements is going to risk change to neighborhood. And some neighborhoods have argued for no change, which I think does not necessarily progress us to a better life, or some neighborhoods to a better life. So the idea is to really understand what those impacts can be and what you can plan for. And our colleagues at Street Level Advisors have done a lot of research on other large-scale planning efforts and what happens to neighborhoods. And so what's built in, there are 9 goals in the master plan, and one of them is centered around people experiencing homelessness and affordable housing. And really, one of the keys for mitigating displacement and large-scale gentrification is an affordable housing program, inclusionary housing ordinances, tenant protection rights that basically allow a structure of stable housing to stay there continuously as improvements happen.
What about the cost? Do you anticipate a tax increase on property tax, or where does the fund come from to do all the reimagining?
Yeah. So right now, what we've started to identify in the back part of the plan is there's a large amount of existing funding that already exists. County level, there's a coordinated committee with the kind of funny acronym WHAM, but it's around the measures W, A, H, A, and M, which represent a suite of different things from water to parks to people experiencing homelessness, etc. So there's a large amount of county and state level funding that's actually already in place. From there, I think there's a few things that can move forward. One are the ideas of enhanced infrastructure financing districts. So in those areas of improvements, how do you allow, we were talking about CM REAP earlier, how do you allow those benefits of, say, value add to remain in the community and not to go into the pockets of people that live in other communities? And so part of that of an enhanced infrastructure financing district is to try and capture some percentage of that value add, whether it is in land prices, et cetera, to remain in the community, whether that's to go into a land bank for affordable housing or other programs, but to make sure that money gets reinvested and brings the community along at the same time.
That's great. What do you think would be the hurdle that will impact on this plan?
Oh, the hurdle. Well, I mean, the full financing obviously is one of the hurdles. The river also, it runs through, it's all in Los Angeles County, but it runs through 14 separate cities. And so, each of those cities, when we talk, yes, when we talk about things like, inclusionary housing ordinances, those are land use plans, and those happen at the city level. Yeah. So, there's a large effort that has to happen from the county and others to coordinate an effort, because things like displacement don't know city boundaries. Yeah. These are things that have to happen on kind of a larger scale boundary.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. បាទជំរាបសួរទូរទស្សនិកជនជាទីមេត្រីបាទថ្ងៃនេះក្រុមការងារខ្មែរ TV យើងបានមកយកព័ត៌មាននៅ Los Angeles River គឺទន្លេនៅទីក្រុង Los Angeles បាទខ្ញុំនៅទីក្រុង Los Angeles នេះប្រហែលជា32ឆ្នាំហើយខ្ញុំអត់ដឹងថានៅកន្លែងយើងនេះមានទន្លេទេបាទទន្លេនេះគឺទន្លេផងហើយគេហៅថា flood control នឹងបានន័យថាពេលណាភ្លៀងខ្លាំងទឹកច្រើនទឹកហូរតាមនេះហូរទៅដល់ទឹកស្ទឹងក៏ប៉ុន្តែបើសិនជាអត់មានភ្លៀងទេយើងមានទឹកបន្តិចបន្តួចហើយគេចង់ធ្វើកន្លែងនេះឲ្យទៅជាកន្លែងស្អាតមួយដែលមានអុំទូកលេងដែលមានមនុស្សចុះលេងបានដែលមានកន្លែងខ្លះមានលក់អីវ៉ាន់ធ្វើដូចជាស្ទឹងមួយនៅទីក្រុង Texas San Antonio ចឹងដែរឬក៏នៅកន្លែង city ផ្សេងទៀតដែរនៅជុំវិញពិភពលោកហើយថ្ងៃនេះគេមានគម្រោងការធំនឹងតាំងពីយូរទៅហើយក៏ប៉ុន្តែវាគម្រោងការហ្នឹងដោយសារតែអស់លុយច្រើនពេកហើយវាមិនអាចលូតលាស់ទៅមុខហើយថ្ងៃនេះគេចង់យកគម្រោងការហ្នឹងយកមកធ្វើម្ដងទៀតសារឡើងវិញម្ដងទៀតដើម្បី ដើម្បីឲ្យប្រជាជនទាំងអស់បានដឹងថាយើងគួរតែប្រើអ្វីដែលយើងមានហើយប្រើឲ្យវាបានប្រយោជន៍ទៅដល់ប្រជាជនយើងនៅកន្លែងអស់នេះបាទដូចជាទូរទស្សនិកជនឃើញហើយមានថ្មមានដើមឈើមានអីនៅចំកណ្ដាលហ្នឹងដូចថាអត់ស្អាតសោះដល់ហើយគេចង់សម្អាតខាងក្នុង river ហ្នឹងហើយកន្លែងណាមានមនុស្សច្រើនគេចង់សង់របៀបជាកំសាន្តមួយកន្លែងកំសាន្តមួយហើយល្អមួយដើម្បីឲ្យប្រជាជនទាំងអស់នៅជិតឬក៏ឆ្ងាយបានមកលេងហើយនឹងបានផលប្រយោជន៍ដល់អ្នកនេះផងដែរហើយថ្ងៃនេះអង្គប្រជុំនេះគឺជាប្រជុំលើកទី1ហើយដែលខ្មែរ TV យើងបានមកដកយកព័ត៌មាននៅកន្លែងនេះហើយសង្ឃឹមថា project នេះគឺឬក៏មុខការអភិវឌ្ឍនេះនឹងលូតលាស់ទៅមុខនៅពេលឆាប់ខាងមុខនេះដើម្បីឲ្យយើងទាំងអស់គ្នានឹងបានសប្បាយទាំងអស់គ្នាបាទសូមអរគុណបាទ